The airport was crowded that morning. People moved quickly, pulling heavy suitcases, rushing to check-in counters and standing in long lines. Announcements echoed across the wide halls, mixing with the sound of rolling luggage and children's voices. Some travelers looked calm, while others showed stress on their faces, afraid of missing their flights. Families hugged, businessmen tapped on laptops, and children asked questions with curiosity. The place was full of life, full of noise and full of stories. Among the many people waiting was Daniel, a young man who walked carefully with the help of his service dog, Max. Daniel had been through difficult years before this moment. He had served in the army, and during his time in service he faced injuries that changed his life. Walking alone had become difficult for him, and sometimes he felt anxious in crowded places. Max, his golden retriever, was not only trained to help him physically but also gave him emotional strength. Wherever Daniel went, Max stayed close, calm, and alert, as if he could read his owner's mind. Max was known for his quiet nature. Service dogs are trained to stay steady in any situation, no matter the noise or the confusion around them. In airports, it was common for children to point at Max and smile, and parents would explain that he was a special helper. Some people admired the dog silently, respecting the vest that clearly said "Service dog, do not pet." Daniel had learned to ignore the stares and whispers. He only cared about Max's presence beside him. That presence gave him the courage to move around places like airports, which otherwise would have been overwhelming. On this day, Daniel and Max were waiting near the boarding gate for their flight. He was flying home to see his family after many months, and though he felt tired, there was also excitement in his heart. Max sat at his feet, relaxed, his warm eyes watching everything around him. A little boy sitting across the waiting area kept smiling at Max, whispering to his mother how beautiful the dog was. Daniel smiled politely but kept to himself. Airports made him nervous, and Max was his comfort in the middle of all the busyness. The waiting area slowly filled with more passengers. Some were talking on phones, others were opening snacks, and a few sat quietly reading books. Everything seemed normal, just like any other travel day. But then something happened that broke the normal rhythm. Max suddenly stood up. His body stiffened, his ears lifted, and his eyes locked on one direction. Daniel, surprised, looked down at him. "What is it, boy?" he whispered. Normally, Max would only stand if Daniel gave him a signal or if he noticed something unusual. Daniel followed his gaze and saw a woman walking toward the gate. She looked tired but carried a small baby in her arms. The baby's head rested against her shoulder and she adjusted the blanket gently. There was nothing strange in that picture, at least to Daniel's eyes. But Max's reaction was not ordinary. Without warning, Max barked. It was not a playful bark. It was sharp, loud, and carried urgency. Everyone in the area turned their heads. The sudden sound shocked people because service dogs almost never bark in public places. Max barked again, pulling slightly on the leash, his eyes fixed on the woman with the baby. Daniel felt his heart race. "Max, no!" he whispered, trying to calm him down. He gently tugged the leash, but Max would not sit. His tail was low, his body tense, and every bark seemed like an alarm. Daniel had trusted Max for years, but this behavior confused him. People around began to whisper. "Why is the dog barking at the woman?" someone said. "Is it not trained well?" Another person added, shaking their head. The woman holding the baby stopped walking. Her eyes widened as the barking grew louder. She clutched her baby tighter, protective, and looked directly at Daniel. "Control your dog!" she shouted nervously. The baby stirred at the loud noise, letting out a small cry. Other passengers frowned, their faces showing worry. Daniel felt trapped. He wanted to defend Max, but at the same time he knew how it looked to others. He knelt down quickly, placing his hand on Max's collar. "Max, easy," he said softly. But Max refused to settle. His eyes stayed on the baby, his bark echoing through the waiting area. Airport staff came rushing over. A security guard appeared from the corner, his hand raised as he asked firmly, "Sir, is everything okay here? Please control your dog." Daniel swallowed hard. He's never done this before, he explained, his voice almost apologetic. "He's trained. I don't know what's happening." The guard looked suspicious. Some passengers nodded in agreement, saying dogs should not behave this way in an airport. Others, however, seemed uncertain. They whispered things like maybe he senses something, or dogs don't usually act without a reason. The woman now stood frozen, rocking her baby to calm it down. She looked frightened and anger mixed with fear on her face. "Your dog is scaring my child," she cried. Daniel felt his chest tighten. He wanted to apologize, but deep inside he remembered all the times Max had noticed things long before he did. Like when Daniel was about to have a panic attack, or when his blood pressure dropped suddenly. Max had never been wrong before. He tried to trust that thought, but the scene in front of him was becoming louder and more chaotic. Max barked again, pulling at the leash with more strength, almost as if begging Daniel to let him go. The golden retriever's eyes were full of intensity. He was not just reacting randomly, he was trying to communicate something urgent. Daniel could feel it. The entire waiting area had now gone silent except for the baby's soft cries and Max's barks. People stood with their phones out, recording the unusual scene. Others held their breath, waiting to see what would happen next. Daniel's heart pounded as he looked between the woman, her baby, and his dog. He had never felt so torn before. Should he pull Max away and apologize, or should he trust his loyal companion's instincts? What happened in the next few seconds would shock everyone in the airport. The airport waiting area was filled with tension. People who had been calmly sitting only minutes ago were now on edge. Some were standing, some whispering to each other, and others holding up their phones to record what was happening. Max's barking echoed loudly, bouncing off the tall walls, making every head turn. Daniel could feel sweat on his forehead. This was not the picture of calmness he wanted to show. He had trusted Max in every difficult situation before, but right now, with dozens of eyes on him, he felt trapped between the judgment of strangers and the faith he had in his dog. The security guard took a step closer. His voice was calm but firm. "Sir, if you cannot control the dog, we may have to remove you both from the gate area." Daniel shook his head quickly. "Please listen. He is a service dog. He has never behaved like this without a reason. I swear he is trained." His words came out fast, almost pleading, but he knew many people wouldn't believe him. He could see doubt in their eyes, like they were thinking he was making excuses for poor training. The woman holding the baby looked scared and angry. She tried to move back, but Max's barking grew louder every time she shifted her weight. The baby began to cry louder, the sound mixing with the chaos of the moment. "I can't believe this is happening," she said with tears in her eyes, clutching the baby close to her chest. "Get him away from me!" Daniel's heart pounded. He crouched lower, placing both hands on Max's harness, whispering into his ear. "Max, what is it? Tell me." "What do you see?" The golden retriever's whole body trembled with urgency, his focus fixed only on the baby. It was as if the rest of the world didn't exist. Daniel had seen Max alert him before when he was about to faint, or when his anxiety became unbearable. Max had senses that no human could understand, and now those same senses were locked onto that fragile infant. The crowd around them grew restless. A man in a suit muttered loudly, "That dog should not be here if it can't behave." But another voice rose from the back, a woman with a kind tone. "Wait," she said, standing up. "Service dogs don't bark like that for no reason. Maybe something's wrong." Her words calmed some of the people, but others continued to shake their heads. The tension was like a rope being pulled tightly from both ends, ready to snap. Daniel looked up at the woman with the baby. "Please just stop for one moment," he begged. Let Max do what he's trying to do." The woman hesitated, fear in her eyes. "He's scaring my baby," she repeated. "I don't trust this." The security guard raised his hand. "Everyone calm down. Let's step aside and figure this out." He motioned toward the mother. "Ma'am, please come with me." But before she could move, Max lunged forward again, barking fiercely, his nails scraping against the polished airport floor. Daniel barely held him back with the leash. The sudden action made the baby cry even louder, its tiny face turning red. And then suddenly everything changed. The baby's cry stopped. The little body went limp against the mother's shoulder. The mother gasped in horror, her scream filling the air. My baby's not moving." Every single person froze. The phone stopped recording, mouths dropped open and eyes widened in shock. The busy airport around them seemed to disappear, as if this one corner had gone silent except for the desperate cry of a mother holding her unresponsive child. Daniel's eyes widened. His chest tightened as he realized what Max had been trying to tell them all along. The dog had sensed something none of them could see. The baby was in danger. The woman screamed, her voice shaking with panic. "Somebody help me, please." Passengers jumped up. A young nurse who had been quietly sitting in the waiting area dropped her coffee and ran forward. I'm a nurse, she shouted, pushing through the crowd. She reached the mother and gently but quickly took the baby into her arms. The baby's lips looked pale, its body still. People gasped, covering their mouths, tears forming in their eyes as they realized the seriousness of the situation. Max stopped barking now, but let out a low whine. Pacing in circles, his tail low, ears pinned back. His instincts had been right, and he knew it. His deep brown eyes stayed fixed on the baby, full of concern. The nurse laid the baby across her arm and checked quickly. "The baby's choking," she said, her voice urgent. She began tapping the infant's back firmly, then used her fingers carefully to clear the tiny airway. The seconds felt like hours. Everyone in the waiting area held their breath, unable to move, praying silently that the baby would survive. The mother stood beside the nurse, sobbing uncontrollably, her hands shaking. "Please, please save my baby." Daniel felt tears sting his eyes as he knelt next to Max, stroking his head. "You were right, boy. You were right," he whispered, his voice breaking. The nurse continued her work, her face steady and focused. And then finally a small cough came from the baby, followed by a faint cry. Relief flooded the room. People began clapping softly, some crying, some covering their faces with their hands. The baby's cry grew louder, the sound of life returning, the sound that made everyone's heart swell with gratitude. The mother fell to her knees, hugging the baby tightly, whispering thanks through her tears. She looked at Daniel, her face full of shock and guilt. I thought your dog was dangerous, but he was saving my baby." Daniel shook his head, still holding Max close. "Don't blame yourself. None of us knew. But he did." He looked at Max with deep love and pride. He always knows. Passengers around them clapped louder now, some recording the emotional moment, others putting away their phones out of respect. The security guard stood silently, his firm posture softened, his eyes watery. Even he had to admit this was something extraordinary. A woman in the crowd whispered, "That dog's a hero." Another man nodded, saying, "We judged too fast. He saved that child." The nurse handed the baby back to the grateful mother, who held the child as if she would never let go again. She bent down to Max's level, tears rolling down her face. "Thank you," she whispered to the golden retriever, her voice breaking. "Thank you for saving my baby." Max wagged his tail slowly, his eyes warm and gentle again, as if all the urgency had left him. He had done his job, and now he simply wanted comfort from Daniel. Daniel hugged him tightly, burying his face in his fur. "Good boy," he whispered. "You saved a life today." The airport waiting area, once full of chaos, had now turned into a place of unity and awe. Strangers who had been quick to judge were now connected by a single story, one they would never forget. And yet, as Daniel looked at Max, he knew this was only the beginning of what people would come to realize. The truth of what had just happened would spread far beyond these walls, and the world would soon know the power of a dog's instinct. The baby's soft cry still echoed in the waiting area, and it felt like music to everyone's ears. A few minutes earlier, the sound of Max's barking had filled the air with tension. Now the baby's crying had become the most beautiful sound, a reminder that life had returned. People who had been strangers only moments before stood together, clapping softly, some wiping away tears, others whispering about what they had just witnessed. The nurse continued to check the infant carefully, her hands gentle but firm. She looked at the mother with a reassuring smile. "Your baby is breathing fine now. It was a choking episode. You must be careful, but everything is okay." The mother nodded quickly, tears rolling down her face as she held her child close, rocking gently as if she was afraid to let go. She kissed the baby's forehead again and again, whispering words only a mother could say in such a moment. Words of love, fear, and relief all mixed together. Daniel remained on his knees, one hand resting on Max's back. His heart was still racing. He replayed the last few minutes in his mind, the sharp barking, the accusing eyes of strangers, and then the shocking moment when the baby went limp. He could hardly believe what had just unfolded in front of him. If Max hadn't reacted, if people had forced him to drag Max away, the outcome could have been far worse. The thought made Daniel shiver. He hugged Max tightly, whispering, "I don't know how you do it, boy, but I'm grateful you're with me." The security guard, who had earlier demanded control, now looked humbled. He stepped forward, clearing his throat. "Sir," he said softly, "I want to apologize. I didn't understand. None of us did. Your dog is remarkable. Daniel looked up at him, his eyes still wet with emotion. He's more than remarkable, Daniel said quietly. He's my lifeline. The passengers who had recorded the scene began to lower their phones. Some still kept them raised, but the atmosphere had changed. It wasn't just about capturing something unusual anymore. It was about remembering something extraordinary. A woman in her 50s put her phone away and instead walked closer, placing a hand on Daniel's shoulder. That dog deserves a medal, she said warmly. The mother, still shaking, turned to Daniel. Her voice cracked as she spoke. I judged you. I thought your dog was dangerous. I thought he was attacking us, but the truth is he saw what none of us did. I will never forget this. You and Max saved my baby's life. Daniel tried to shake his head, but she insisted. She bent down and placed her hand on Max's head. Max licked her fingers gently, as if accepting her gratitude with quiet dignity. The mother smiled through her tears. Meanwhile, the airport staff began speaking into their radios, making sure medical assistance would be ready when the mother and baby boarded the plane. They wanted to ensure the child was safe. A paramedic soon arrived, checking the baby again and confirming the nurse's quick action had saved the child's life. As this was happening, Max finally lay down beside Daniel, his tail wagging slowly. The urgency in his eyes was gone, replaced with calmness. He seemed to know his job was done. Passengers walked past him with admiration, some whispering about how incredible dogs could be, how they sensed things humans never could. Daniel leaned against the chair, his hand never leaving Max's fur. He could hear people around him talking, their voices filled with amazement. I've never seen anything like it. That dog knew before anyone else. They should write about this. People need to hear it. The voices made Daniel feel a mixture of pride and disbelief. All he had ever wanted was to live quietly with his loyal companion, but Max had now shown the world something unforgettable. Then came another moment that surprised everyone. The baby's mother, still holding her child close, walked up to Daniel. Her face was pale from the shock, but her eyes carried deep gratitude. She knelt slightly so she could look both at Daniel and Max. I owe you my child's life, she whispered. If there is ever anything I can do for you, please know I will. Daniel didn't know what to say. His throat tightened. He managed a small smile and said softly, Just love your baby. That's all anyone could ask. Her tears flowed again as she nodded. The security guard asked everyone to clear the way so the mother, her baby and the nurse could sit down comfortably until the next announcement. People respected the request, though many still looked back, their eyes lingering on Max as if he was a miracle they had been lucky enough to witness. The atmosphere in the waiting area had changed completely. Minutes earlier, people had been impatient about flight delays and tired from traveling. Now they felt connected in a strange, powerful way. They had shared something unforgettable, something that went beyond ordinary travel stories. Daniel sat down slowly, pulling Max close. He stroked his ears and whispered, You're my hero, Max. You always will be. Max closed his eyes, leaning into the touch, simply happy to be by his partner's side. But even as the calm began to return, Daniel's mind couldn't rest. He kept thinking about the moment when everyone doubted Max, when he almost pulled him away just to avoid embarrassment. That thought haunted him. If he had forced Max to be quiet, the baby might not be alive. He realized something important. Trust in a dog like Max was not just about companionship, it was about survival. Nearby, two older women spoke softly to each other. Do you think that story will reach the news? One asked. The other nodded. It has to. People need to know that service dogs aren't just helpers, they're protectors. That dog saved a child today. Daniel heard their words, and for the first time he felt a strange weight lift from his shoulders. For years he had carried the quiet burden of living with injuries, the whispers of people who didn't understand why he always had a dog with him. But today, Max had proven himself to the world in a way that no words ever could. As time passed, the boarding announcement echoed across the speakers. People began gathering their things, but the waiting area still buzzed with quiet excitement. Several passengers approached Daniel as he stood up, each one offering kind words. Bless that dog. You take care of him, he's special. Thank you for letting us witness something so incredible. Daniel nodded politely, feeling shy but also deeply moved. Max walked proudly beside him, his vest shining under the airport lights. his tail swishing slowly as if he knew he was the center of everyone's admiration. Before stepping toward the gate, Daniel looked back at the mother and her baby one last time. The mother gave him a smile of pure gratitude, holding her baby close. Daniel returned the smile, then walked away with Max, ready to board the plane but knowing this day would never be forgotten. What none of them knew was that the story had already begun spreading beyond the airport. Videos were being uploaded online, captions filled with words like "hero dog," "miracle at the airport," and "service dog saves baby." The moment that shocked everyone here was about to reach people far and wide, touching hearts across the world. And for Daniel and Max, their journey together had just entered a new chapter. The sound of the boarding announcement echoed through the speakers again, but no one in the waiting area seemed to care about the usual hurry anymore. People were still caught up in what had just happened. A baby's life had been saved, and the quiet hero behind it was not a doctor in uniform, not a security officer, but a golden retriever who had broken all the rules of silence to bark at the right moment. Daniel walked with Max toward the gate, but the whispers followed them. People were not whispering in judgment anymore. Instead, their voices carried awe, kindness, and respect. "That's the dog," someone murmured. "The one who saved the baby." Another added, "I've never seen anything like it. It's almost like he knew the future." Daniel kept his eyes down, a little uncomfortable with the attention. He had never been the kind of man who wanted the spotlight. Ever since his time in the army, he preferred quiet corners and simple days. But today, life had placed him and Max in the center of something extraordinary. He reached down to pat Max gently. The dog walked calmly, his tail moving slowly, unaware of the way the world now looked at him. The mother and her baby were escorted by staff to a special area where they could rest before boarding. She kept glancing at Daniel and Max with eyes full of gratitude. Every time their eyes met, she mouthed a silent "thank you," clutching her child closer to her chest. Daniel gave her a small nod in return, but the truth was he felt just as thankful to Max as she did. As they waited for boarding, the atmosphere at the gate softened into something unusual. Strangers who might never have spoken to one another were now sharing thoughts, exchanging smiles, and talking about the dog. A man in a leather jacket leaned toward his wife. "You know," he said quietly, "we read about dogs that sense danger or illness, but to actually see it happen in front of your eyes, it changes something." The wife nodded. "It makes you believe in miracles again." A few rows away, two teenagers who had been recording the whole incident were editing their clips and adding captions before posting them online. Their voices were full of excitement. "This is going viral for sure," one whispered. "Everyone needs to see this dog. People will be amazed." Daniel overheard parts of their conversation and felt his stomach tighten. He didn't like the idea of videos of Max being spread without context. He didn't want fame. He just wanted people to understand the truth that Max was not just a pet, not just a helper, but a lifeline. Yet, deep down, Daniel also knew that maybe sharing this story could help people respect service dogs more, to trust them instead of doubting. That thought gave him comfort. Finally, it was time to board the plane. The airline staff, still shaken but full of admiration, gave Daniel a warm smile. One of them bent down and gently rubbed Max behind the ear before quickly pulling her hand back, realizing the vest said, "Do not pet." Daniel gave a kind smile and said, "It's all right. He deserves it today." The plane filled quickly, but even inside, the story followed them. Passengers pointed at Max as he walked down the aisle, whispering softly. Some smiled at Daniel, giving him nods of respect. Max lay at Daniel's feet when they settled into their seats, resting his head on his paws as though nothing unusual had happened at all. Daniel stroked his fur slowly, his mind replaying the scene again and again. Halfway through the flight, a passenger leaned over from the row across and whispered, "I just wanted to say thank you. My daughter was sitting near that baby earlier, and she hasn't stopped talking about your dog. She said she wants to be a nurse now when she grows up." The man smiled warmly. What happened inspired her. "You should know that." Daniel's throat tightened with emotion. He nodded. "Thank you. I'll tell Max," he said softly. He glanced down at his sleeping dog. Though I think he already knows in his own way. The rest of the flight passed quietly, but the event remained alive in everyone's minds. Even after landing, as people gathered their belongings and prepared to leave, the story was the only topic. Strangers who would normally rush past each other now spoke about trust, about instincts, about how life could change in a single moment. When they reached the baggage claim, Daniel was surprised to see a group of people waiting, not for their luggage, but for him. Somehow news had already spread within the airport. Staff members, including the paramedic and the nurse who had helped, were waiting to thank him once more. The mother stood among them, the baby now calm and asleep in her arms. She approached Daniel with careful steps. "I wanted to see you before we left," she said softly. "My name is Rachel. And this little one," she glanced at her baby with tears in her eyes, "owes his life to your dog." She bent down to Max's level again, whispering, "Thank you, brave one." Max wagged his tail gently, licking her hand once. Rachel looked up at Daniel, her eyes still wet but shining. "I don't know how to repay you. I don't even know how to begin." Daniel shook his head. "You don't owe me anything. You don't owe Max anything either. We were just where we needed to be." But Rachel pressed her hand over her heart. "You don't understand. People always talk about heroes in uniforms, but today, a dog saved my child. I'll never forget that. I'll tell my son this story when he grows up so he knows there's goodness and loyalty in this world." Her words touched Daniel deeply. He nodded quietly, unable to find the right reply. Behind them, people clapped again. The nurse, smiling warmly, said, "If I hadn't been there, I might not have believed it myself. That dog sensed trouble before anyone else. You're both heroes today." Daniel's cheeks flushed and he lowered his eyes. "I'm just lucky to have him," he said softly. The crowd eventually began to scatter, each person carrying their own version of the story. But Daniel knew it wouldn't stop here. He could see teenagers already typing on their phones, videos already gaining attention online. Soon, people outside this airport, outside this city, would know what had happened. Later, when Daniel and Max finally stepped outside into the cool evening air, he breathed deeply. He looked down at Max, who sat calmly at his side, tail wagging slowly as if he had already moved on. "You did more than save a life today, boy," Daniel whispered. "You reminded everyone what trust means." Max tilted his head, ears perking, before leaning into Daniel's leg with quiet affection. Daniel smiled, tears stinging his eyes. He knew this was a day that had changed everything, not only for the mother and her baby, not only for the strangers in the airport, but for himself too. For the first time in years, Daniel no longer felt like a man carrying invisible scars. With Max by his side, he felt like part of something greater, a story of hope, trust, and second chances. And he knew that tomorrow, when the world began to talk about what had happened, Max's name would be remembered not as just a dog, but as a guardian whose instincts shocked everyone and saved a child's life. News spreads quickly in today's world, and the story of what happened at the airport was no exception. Before Daniel even made it home, videos of Max barking and then saving the baby's life had already begun to appear online. Travelers had uploaded short clips, and within hours, people from all over were watching, commenting, and sharing. Headlines began to form. "Service dog saves baby at airport," "Golden retriever becomes hero after dramatic scene." When everyone doubted him, this dog proved them wrong. But Daniel didn't know any of this yet. All he knew was that he and Max were finally home after a long flight. As they stepped outside the airport into the fresh evening air, Daniel felt an unusual calmness. He bent down, hugged Max tightly, and whispered, "You changed so many lives today, boy." Max wagged his tail, his big brown eyes warm and steady as if to say, "That's just my job." The following morning, Daniel's phone wouldn't stop ringing. Friends and family sent messages saying they saw him on the news. Old army buddies called to check in, their voices filled with pride. "That dog of yours is a real soldier," one of them joked. "He's more disciplined and braver than half of us ever were." Daniel chuckled softly, but his heart swelled with pride. As the hours passed, reporters began reaching out. Local news stations wanted interviews, magazines wanted to feature Max, and animal organizations wanted to honor him. Daniel wasn't used to this kind of attention. He had always lived quietly, relying on Max to give him comfort and courage. Now the world wanted to hear his story. At first he hesitated, but then he realized something. Maybe sharing Max's story wasn't about fame. Maybe it was about teaching people to trust service dogs, to respect their instincts, and to understand the deep bond between humans and animals. A few days later, Daniel agreed to appear on a local news program. He sat nervously in the studio with Max at his feet. The interviewer smiled warmly, her eyes shining with excitement. "Daniel," she said, "your service dog Max has become a national hero. Tell us what was going through your mind in that moment at the airport when everyone doubted him." Daniel took a deep breath. "To be honest," he said slowly, "I felt torn. People were staring and I didn't want trouble. But I also knew Max. I've trusted him with my life before. He saved me from panic attacks, from dangerous health episodes. Deep inside, I knew he wasn't barking without a reason, and I'm glad I listened because he saved that baby's life." The interviewer nodded, turning her eyes toward Max, who sat calmly beside Daniel, wearing his vest. "And Max," she said with a smile, "you're the star today." The camera zoomed in on Max, who tilted his head and wagged his tail, making everyone in the studio laugh. The clip spread even faster online. People loved not only the heroic story, but also Max's calm, innocent expression, as if he didn't even realize what a big difference he had made. Comments poured in from around the world. "Dogs truly are angels on earth. That veteran and his dog deserve the highest honor. I will never look at a service dog the same way again." Meanwhile, Rachel, the baby's mother, also spoke publicly. Standing with her baby in her arms, she said, her voice trembling, "I thought that dog was dangerous. I judged too quickly. But the truth is, he saw what none of us did. He saved my baby's life. I will forever be thankful." Her words touched millions of viewers, and her story reminded everyone not to jump to conclusions too quickly. As the weeks went on, Daniel noticed something change in the way strangers treated him and Max. Before, people often gave him curious looks, sometimes even doubting whether he really needed a service dog. Now, when they saw Max, their eyes softened. Some even stopped to say kind words. "That's the hero dog, isn't it?" they would whisper. Daniel would nod humbly, patting Max's head. Animal organizations began sending letters and awards. One group mailed a shiny medal with Max's name engraved on it, for bravery beyond words. Another sent a basket full of treats, toys, and even a new harness embroidered with the word hero. Daniel placed the medal on the shelf above his fireplace, but Max only cared about the treats. To him, life was simple. Stay close to Daniel, protect him, and help where he could. One evening, Daniel sat on his porch watching the sunset, Max lying peacefully at his feet. He thought about everything that had happened. The tension in the airport, the judgmental looks, the baby going limp, the nurse stepping in, and finally, the relief of hearing the baby cry again. The scene replayed in his mind like a movie he couldn't stop watching. He looked down at Max and said softly, "You know, boy, you taught everyone something that day. You taught me too. You showed me that sometimes we humans doubt too much. We want explanations, proof, and evidence. But sometimes trust is enough. I almost didn't trust you in that moment, but you proved me wrong. You saved a child's life because you trusted your instincts." Max raised his head and looked at Daniel with gentle eyes, then placed his paw on Daniel's foot as if to say, "We're in this together." In the months that followed, Daniel and Max were invited to schools, community centers, and veteran gatherings. They shared their story, not to gain attention, but to inspire others. Daniel would stand quietly at the front of a room, Max by his side, and say, "This dog is not just my helper. He's my partner, my protector, my family. He reminded me and everyone else that sometimes the smallest bark can carry the biggest warning. Never ignore it." Children loved meeting Max. They would sit in circles around him, listening wide-eyed as teachers retold the airport story. Max, patient as always, would lie calmly, letting the children admire him from a respectful distance. Daniel would smile quietly, proud that his companion had become a symbol of trust and loyalty for so many. Rachel stayed in touch too. She often sent Daniel pictures of her baby, growing stronger every day. Every message ended with the same line, "We will never forget Max." One day she wrote, "I've started volunteering at a local children's hospital because of what happened. I want to give back the way Max gave me back my child. Thank you, Daniel. Thank you for sharing him with the world." Daniel read the message with tears in his eyes. He hugged Max tightly and whispered, "See, boy, you're changing lives even from afar." And so what began as an ordinary day at the airport turned into a story that touched countless hearts. It was a reminder that heroes don't always wear uniforms, and miracles don't always come with bright lights or loud announcements. Sometimes they come in the form of a golden retriever, barking loudly when no one else understands why, until the truth is revealed. For Daniel, the journey with Max continued just as before, with quiet walks, shared silences, and unspoken trust. But now, whenever strangers approached with admiration in their eyes, Daniel no longer felt embarrassed or shy. He felt proud, not for himself, but for Max, because Max wasn't just his service dog. He was a reminder to the world of something pure and powerful, the bond between a human and a loyal animal, built on love, trust, and instincts that could save lives. Years later, when people spoke about heroes, some would remember soldiers, some would remember doctors, and some would remember teachers. But many would also remember the story of Max, the service dog who barked at the right time, saved a baby's life, and shocked everyone with his wisdom. And for Daniel, that was enough. Because he knew that as long as he had Max by his side, he had already witnessed the greatest miracle of all, the miracle of trust.